Hello everyone. So I guess you're wondering, what is a shell top? I'm glad that you're wondering because I used to wonder the same thing. A shell top is basically a fancier way of saying it's a tank top, but it's fancier. It's usually worn under a really nice outer shell, like a nice blazer or an awesome cardigan. Now, they can be made of any type of fabric from cotton to wool. I, on the other hand, really love a nice silk shell top that is comfortable and easy to wear, and at the same time is very stylish. I like one that can go from a day in the office to a night out. So with that said, I'd love for you to stay with me and I'll show you how to draft the ultimate shell top. Hi, I'm Aletha with Ribbons and Zippers. I'm so glad that you stopped by today. If you're new here, welcome to my channel, because here on this channel, I show you tips and techniques on how to make a better garment. And today, I'm showing you how to draft a shell top from your bodice block. So grab your block and all of your tools that you'll need to do your drafting, and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so this is what I traced off. I traced off my front bodice and I traced off my back bodice. You are going to trace off your front and your back. So the first one I'm going to start working with is my front bodice. I'm going to do some adjustments so that I come up with a V-neck, and I'm going to lower my armhole, and I am going to extend my waist down. Okay, for the back, really quick, I'm going to make a yoke, and everything else is pretty much going to stay the same. So let's get started. I'm going to put the back to the side. Let's grab our front bodice. So the very first thing that I want to do is I want to make some darts. Alright, so I already have this waist dart here. I have this shoulder dart. First thing I'm going to do is close up my shoulder dart. And as I said, I want to lower my armhole, so what I'm going to do is make a dart from my apex to my mid armhole. Okay, so I'm going to close that up. The next thing I want to do is close up my waist dart as well, but before I do that, I'm going to measure my side seam. So I'm going to go to 1/3 of my side seam and I'm going to make a mark. Alright, so I have a mark here. So I'm going to make a dart here as well, okay, for my side dart. And then we're going to cut these pieces. I'm going to cut two, but not through my darts. Okay. So I'm going to close up my shoulder dart here. Let's take that together. And going to open up my waist dart as well. Alright, so here's my pieces. Closed up my shoulder dart. I have my armhole dart and my side dart and my waist dart that I have to maneuver. So I have a measurement here. I jotted it down for my armhole. I want my armhole to be 10.5 inches from my shoulder to my side seam. So in order for this knot to move, I'm going to grab another piece of paper. Alright, so here we have it. So I'm going to tape this down just a little bit. Okay, so that's not going anywhere. But I want to measure around my armhole to 10.5 inches. Okay, perfect. This is 10.5 inches. I'm just going to tape it now so that it won't move. That's exactly where I want it to be. Now for my dart, which is my side dart, I'm going to go ahead and close up my waist dart, and that's perfect. Now I want to go over here to my neck. This is going to be a V-neck. One thing that's really awesome about a shell top is that you can make it however you want. It could be a V-neck like I'm doing here. It could be a round neck. It could be a boat neck. It could be high. It could be low. You can add cap sleeves, which is really awesome. I like no sleeves, so I like it to be sleeveless where I can put on my shell, which would be my blazer or my cardigan, and it would look awesome. And I don't have to worry about sleeves. You can make it as high as you want or as low as you want, but be careful though, because if you make it too low, like towards your hips, then it becomes a tunic. We want to keep it as a shell. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and show you how I'm going to make this into a V-neck. So from my neckline, I know that I want my shoulders to be 5 inches. So I'm going to measure my shoulder. It's coming out to be 5 inches. That's perfect. So let me just mark. It's not much of a difference, just about 1/8 of an inch there. So I want my neck to measure about 8 1/4 inches. So I'm going to put a mark there. So here's my mark for my neck. What I want to do is I want to round this down. I want it to be somewhat of a curve, not a straight line. Now the next thing that I want to do is lengthen my shell. Don't want it to stop at my waist. I want it to go down. Like I said, we don't want it to be a tunic, but I do want my shell to go a little bit past my waist, maybe to my high hip. I'm going to go down about 8 inches. Then I'm going to include my hem, and I'm going to mark that. I'm going to square down. Okay, so now I have another measurement, 1/4 of my hem. All right, so here I have my hem, and then I squared up to my armhole. I smoothed out my armhole here, so I'm just going to get rid of those pieces. That's my armhole. My neck is done. This is my nice little neckline. I removed the neck, all of that extra paper we didn't need. So I'm going to just go ahead and start adding my seam allowance. 1/2 inch seam allowance for my shoulder. So for the front, I have right here a small little dot. When I sew my side seam, I'm going to stop and I'm going to create a slit. I added a mark here that says fold. There's no seam in the front. My 1/4 inch seam allowance around my neck and 1/2 inch around my arm. Now for my facing, we're going to do about 1.5 inches, okay, and 1.5 inches on the yarn. When I do the facing, remember the facing needs to be a little bit more fit. So I'm going to come down about 1/16 of an inch for both, because for the other side, for the back armhole and the back facing, we also want 1/16 of an inch. So that will give it 1/8 of an inch less, so that it holds the facing and the armhole a little bit more snug. All right, so for the armhole, I'm going to do about 1.5 inches away from my armhole. Remember, we're going to come down 1/16 of an inch. I'm going to start here first. I'm going to go all the way around. So this is my armhole facing, and I'm going to come down that very small 1/16 of an inch. All right. Very small, okay? And then I'm going to do the same thing on my front facing. I'm going to give it 1.5 inches from my original line here. All right, and then I'm going to give it a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to trace that off with a tracing wheel, and I'm going to cut that out. So I'm going to have my facing and my front pattern. Okay, the back is very simple. I am going to come down half of my arm, and my armhole for my back needs to be a little bit bigger, 11 inches. All right, and how do we get the back armhole to be 11 inches? First, I just want to measure my armhole. Same way I did the other one, I'm just going to walk it. I only need literally 1/4 of an inch, so don't have to worry about doing anything to the waist dart. I just need to close up my shoulder dart. All right, so I want more of a yoke than my horizontal balance line. I really want it to be like right in the middle, which means I would go down to the middle. Let's do 5 inches. Let me just measure and get them going to just walk it so that I have a correct measurement. And I'm going to measure down to 5 inches here. All right, so from that 5-inch mark, that's how much of a yoke that I would like to have. And I'm going to measure. So that's 5 inches. So this is going to be my yoke. Now what I want to do is I want to close up that dart. I am going to create a cutting line. I'm only going to go from the middle of my back shoulder dart, and I'm going to go to my horizontal balance line. All right, let's make a slash on the horizontal balance line. Okay, and make sure we cut to but not through, so I reinforce it, and then I'm going to grab my scissors and I'm going to cut straight down the middle of my dart, to but not through. Okay, that way I can take my dart and close it. All right, so here's my piece that I'm going to move. I'm going to close up that shoulder dart, but before I do, we're going to do the same thing that we did on the front. We're going to grab some more paper, some tracing paper, just like we did in the front. Okay, so here's a piece that we need to move. We need to close it up. We need to make sure that it's going to be 5 inches. This is true our shoulder from the tip to tip, and get a brand new shoulder line. I'm going to grab a marker. Perfect. Okay, so now we have our armhole that needs to be trued a little bit here. Neck is fine. So now we have our back, the yoke, and the bottom part of my back. And I said that my front, remember, the front of my top is 12 1/4 inches. So I'm going to make my back the same. All right, we don't have to do any darts on the back the way I did the front. So I'm going to separate my yoke from the bottom. Okay, my center back is going to be on the fold, the bottom part. The center back for the yoke is going to have seam allowances. All right, so this is my new side seam. So from the center back, I'm going to go down 8 inches. And I am going to go ahead and just make my seam allowances. So I have a seam allowance for my back bodice. My center back is going to be on the fold. The top portion is going to need a seam allowance. We're going to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the side seam. 1/2 inch seam allowance for hem. 1/2 inch seam allowance for my armhole. Alright, this is done. Just remember, this is on the fold. This is the side seam. We went down 8 inches. We have a 1/2 inch seam allowance, but we also too want to make a point for our slit on the side. Well, I really hope that you're enjoying what you're learning, because this is an awesome day to night ultimate shell top. I love it. I really hope that you're liking it. If you are, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell so that you can be reminded when to tune in for the next lesson. Okay, so the very first thing that we're going to do is stay stitch our neckline, starting from our shoulder to our center back. This is our back yoke. We're going to do the same thing for our V-neck. Next, match the notches on your yoke to the notches on your back. Then sew your 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way across the back, attaching the yoke to the back bottom. Then go ahead and finish your seam and press. Next, take your front bodice and we're going to attach them 1/2 inch seam allowance at the shoulders. I am going to finish my shoulders, the raw edges of the shoulders, do a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then press it flat. Now, I do want to suggest to grab some cardstock or a piece of paper, and when you do your shoulder seam, place the cardstock underneath and then press. We don't want to get the seam impression on the other side of our blouse. So the next thing that you're going to do is you're going to attach the shoulder seams together on your front facing with your back facing, and then you're going to go ahead and finish with your serger or a zigzag stitch all the way around the outside of your facing. All right, and while you're at it, why not attach the facings for the back and front of your blouse at the shoulder? So this is my back armhole, this is my front armhole facing. So I would attach the two pieces at the shoulder and also go all the way around with my serger to finish that seam. The next step is to attach my facing right sides to right sides. I'm going to sew my facing matching my shoulder seams and matching my notches all the way around to the back. Once I get the facing on, then I'm going to turn it over and do a top stitching. But before I do that, I created a buttonhole loop out of the same silk fabric, about 1/4 inch, and then I made a top stitch along the sewn edge. So I'm going to take my gauge and I'm going to measure down about 5/8 of an inch from my raw edge, and I'm going to make a mark. And I'm going to take my loop and I'm going to place it with the seam of the loop facing down. Make sure that I put my loop under that mark that I made. Then I am going to pin my loop so that it stays in place. Next, I'm going to pin my facing Make sure that the shoulder seams match perfectly and match the notches. Pin all the way down to the center front. Again, match any notches that you've created to make sure it's a nice, perfect fit. Once you have your facing nicely pinned onto your top, right sides to right sides, then go ahead and sew your 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now that I have my 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around my facing from my front to my back, right down the side of the facing on both sides. On this side, we enclosed our loop for a buttonhole. There it is right there. Okay, so now we're going to do some trimming. So we're going to cut our V-neck so that we can turn it. And remember, the V-neck has a slight curve. Okay, so we are going to make some notches along the neckline so that when we fold it, there's no bulk. We are going to press. When we press, we want to make sure that we're pressing the seam towards the facing like that, because we're going to understitch all the way around. Understitching is so important. Make a slit right down the middle of your V-neck to the thread, but don't cut through the thread. That's the first cut. You're going to make some notches, right? So we're going to make a few of these notches up to the shoulder because it sort of straightens out there, but make a few notches along the curve on both sides of your neckline. And then we're going to press our seam towards the facing, and we're going to make a really nice understitch all the way around from end to end. Okay, when you get to your corner that you're going to turn, go as close as you can with your understitching. You may not be able to get all the way to the end, but as close as you can with the understitching. All right, so for your back neck, you see there's a curve here. You're going to want to make some notches on your back neck as well. Next, we're going to do the same thing for the sleeve facing. The front and back sleeves are already attached at the shoulder, so we're going to match the shoulders, and we're going to attach with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and we're going to go ahead and do our understitching just like we did for the front facing and the back facing. All right, so here is my armhole facing attached, and I've left my side seam open, and so I'm going to address the side seam in just a minute, but it's important to layer our seam. Okay, we're just going to trim it down, and I'm going to trim the facing, not the fashion fabric. I'm only going to trim the facing, and I'm going to trim it down close to the seam. Okay, I'm going to trim it about that much. All right, so I'm going to continue to trim my seam all the way down to the other side. After I trim, then I'm going to clip my seam so that it opens up a little bit because it's on a curve, so we always need to clip our seam. Then I'm going to press my seam towards the facing and iron, and then I'm going to understitch. Okay, so here's my understitching. Done very nicely. I trust that yours came out just as nice. The next step is to finish the raw edges all the way down the side seam, and you're going to do both sides. Finish those seams. While you're at it, go ahead and finish the raw edge of your hem as well, because we're coming close to finishing up our hem. Remember, we have our point where we're going to sew our sides together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. We are going to put our sides together, match up everything nicely, sew a 1/2 inch all the way down to our dot. Stop there, give it a couple of back stitches, and then we'll work on doing our little slit. So here's my slit. Here's my slit. Looks really, really nice. The best way to do your slit is to do the hem first. So I'm going to turn up my hem about a 1/2 inch. Okay, then I'm going to press it 1/2 inch and press. Now what we can do is machine stitch, or we can use a needle and thread and sew by hand. Either one is your preference, as long as you know how to make a really nice straight stitch along the bottom, because it will be seen on the other side, or you can do an invisible stitch along the bottom. And once you do that, then we're going to move on to finishing up, and this is pretty much the last step. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope that you loved what you learned. I loved it so much. I can't wait to wear my day tonight gel top. I hope that I get to see what you did. Please put your designs in the description. I would love to see it. Well, that's it for today. I'll see you in the next video.